What secret could a 14-year-old girl's map hold strong enough to decide whether her family's land endures or vanishes? The school bell rang 6 times across the prairie, each note hanging in the September air waiting for an answer. Emma Hartwell stood at the schoolhouse door, watching dust motes dance in the slanted morning light that streamed through windows her father had glazed himself just 3 summers past. The folded map pressed against her ribs through the thin cotton of her dress, a secret weight she'd carried since dawn. "Emma, mind the younger ones while I ready the slates." Miss Caroline's voice carried the particular weariness of a woman who'd taught the same 23 children through 3 seasons of drought and grasshoppers. The schoolteacher's hands moved with practiced efficiency, arranging McGuffey's readers by size, but her eyes lingered on the empty desk by the eastern wall. 7-year-old Timothy Kowalski tugged at Emma's skirt. "My ma says your pa ain't comin' back from Denver." Emma's jaw set like fence wire. "Your ma don't know everything, Timothy Kowalski." But her fingers found the map again, tracing its edges through the fabric. The paper had belonged to her father, surveyor marks and boundary lines drawn in his careful hand, showing their 160 acres and the creek that ran true even in dry years. "Children, take your seats." Miss Caroline struck the bell 3 short taps. "We'll start with ciphering. Emma, please demonstrate long division for the middle grades." At the chalkboard, Emma worked through the problem 437 divided by 19, while her mind wandered to the numbers that mattered more. $43 still owed to Mackenzie's store. 28 days until the tax assessor came through. 160 acres that her father had filed on before she could spell her own name properly. The chalk snapped in her fingers. "Easy now," Miss Caroline murmured, handing her a fresh piece. "Mistakes teach us." But Emma knew some mistakes couldn't be erased. Through the window she could see Cyrus Mackenzie's black gelding tied at the post outside Brennan's land office. The animal stamped and switched its tail, counting time. At 9:30, the stage rolled through town 15 minutes behind schedule, raising dust that settled on the school's front step, laying doubt across the step. Emma pressed her face to the glass, watching the driver hand down a leather mail pouch to the postmaster. No passenger climbed down. No familiar figure emerged to stride up the schoolhouse path. Miss Hartwell. The voice belonged to Cyrus Mackenzie, who'd appeared in the doorway without invitation. His shadow fell across the threshold like spilled tar. "Might I have a word?" Miss Caroline stepped between them. "Mr. Mackenzie, school hours run until 3 o'clock. Won't take but a minute." Mackenzie's eyes found Emma across the room. "Just need to discuss a small matter of business with the young lady." Emma's hand moved to her pocket, feeling the map's sharp corners through the cloth. The paper crackled like dry leaves, like promises breaking. The noon whistle from Johansen's mill cut through the schoolhouse quiet, marking time with the precision of a railroad conductor's watch. Emma sat alone at her desk, while the other children played tag in the dusty yard outside. Miss Caroline had gone to fetch water from the well, leaving Emma with the McGuffey reader open to a lesson about honesty, words that seemed to mock her as she unfolded the map for the first time since sunrise. Her father's surveyor marks covered the paper in neat black ink. Section 14, Township 12, North, Range 6 West. 160 acres of Dakota Territory, filed and paid for according to the Homestead Act. The creek ran diagonal across the southern quarter, marked in blue pencil with notations about flow rates and flow and draw. "That's a fine piece of ground." The voice made Emma startle. Mrs. Brennan, the land agent's wife, stood at the classroom door with a basket of late-season apples. Her round face wore the expression of a woman delivering bad news wrapped in kindness. Your father spoke of it often. Emma folded the map quickly, but not quickly enough. "Child, there ain't no shame in maps. My husband's office is full of them." Mrs. Brennan set the basket on Miss Caroline's desk. "Question is, what do you mean to do with that one?" "Keep it," Emma said. The words came out harder than she intended. "Keep it where?" "Cyrus Mackenzie holds paper on your father's debts. Store credit. Seed. Winter provisions." Mrs. Brennan's voice gentled. $43, Emma. That's near 2 months' wages for a working man." Through the window, Emma watched young Timothy chase a barn cat between the schoolhouse and the privy. Simple problems with simple solutions. Catch the cat or don't catch the cat. Add the numbers or subtract them. But her problem had no clear arithmetic. "My pa's coming back from Denver with silver money," Emma said. He wrote it in his last letter. Mrs. Brennan pulled a chair close to Emma's desk and sat down heavy, her skirts settling around her like a tent. "When did that letter come, child?" "June." The word barely made it past Emma's throat. "It's September now." Emma's fingers worried the map's edges. 3 months of waiting, watching the mail stage, listening for footsteps on the schoolhouse path that never came. 3 months of avoiding Cyrus Mackenzie's eyes when he counted out credit at the store. Mrs. Brennan. Miss Caroline's voice carried from the doorway, where she stood with the water bucket balanced on her hip. "I wasn't expecting visitors. Just brought apples for the children." Mrs. Brennan rose, smoothing her skirts, and had a word with young Emma about practical matters. The two women's eyes met above Emma's head, carrying some adult conversation that excluded her completely. Emma folded the map smaller, creasing it along lines her father had never intended. The afternoon session dragged like a wagon with a broken axle. Emma helped Timothy with his letters, guided Sarah Mueller through her multiplication tables, and swept the floor while Miss Caroline entered attendance in her ledger book. Normal tasks, normal rhythms. But underneath it all she felt time moving like water through her fingers. At 3 o'clock the children scattered toward home like startled birds. Emma lingered, straightening desk rows and washing the chalkboard until only streaks remained. "You don't need to stay, Emma." Miss Caroline locked her desk drawer and gathered her shawl. "I can manage the closing." "I know." Emma dipped the rag in clean water and wrung it out. "Just thinking." "About your father?" "About the map." Emma set the rag aside and pulled the paper from her pocket. "Mrs. Brennan says Mackenzie can take the land for debt." Miss Caroline considered this. "What does the map tell you?" Emma unfolded it carefully, spreading it flat on her desk. The surveyor marks showed clear boundaries, the creek's path, the quarter-section markers her father had driven himself. "It tells me the land belongs to us." "And what does your heart tell you?" Emma traced her finger along the creek line, remembering summer afternoons when she'd helped her father pace off fence lines and mark corners with stone cans. "It tells me home ain't just what you inherit. It's what you're willing to fight for." The school bell tolled once, marking the half-hour. Outside, Cyrus Mackenzie's black gelding stood tied to the hitching post, patient as a courthouse clock. The Dakota sun hung low at 4:30, painting the schoolhouse walls gold as old coins. Emma stood alone in the empty classroom, the map spread before her like a battle plan. Miss Caroline had gone to speak with Reverend Muller about the harvest social, leaving Emma with her thoughts and the steady tick of the wall clock. She pressed her palm flat against the paper, covering the homestead boundaries her father had drawn with such care. Under her hand, the map felt warm, not just from the afternoon light, but from something deeper. This wasn't just surveyor marks and legal descriptions. It was the shape of belonging itself. Through the window she watched Mrs. Johansson hang laundry on the line behind the mill, each white sheet snapping in the prairie wind like a flag of surrender. But Emma had no intention of surrendering. A knock at the door made her look up. Cyrus Mackenzie filled the frame, his shadow stretching across the floorboards toward her desk. "Afternoon, Miss Hartwell." He removed his hat, revealing hair slicked with pomade and a forehead ledger, pale. "Might we discuss business now?" Emma folded the map once, then twice, until it fit in her palm. "What business would that be, Mr. Mackenzie?" "The business of debt, child. Your father owed my store $43 when he left for Denver. That debt don't disappear just because he ain't returned. He's coming back." "Maybe so." Mackenzie stepped into the classroom uninvited, his boots leaving dusty prints on the clean floor. But debts got their own schedule. Territory assessor comes through next week. If taxes ain't paid, land goes to auction. Emma felt the map's edges pressing into her palm. How much for taxes? $12. Plus the store debt makes $55 total. Mackenzie's smile showed teeth yellow as old ivory. "Course. I might consider taking the land in trade. Save you the embarrassment of a public auction." The wall clock chimed 5 times, each note hanging in the air like an accusation. Emma thought of her father pacing off fence lines, teaching her to read elevation markers and creek flows, teaching her that land wasn't just dirt and grass, but the foundation of everything that mattered. "I need time to consider," she said. "Time's what you ain't got, child." Mackenzie replaced his hat and adjusted the brim. "I'll be at Brennan's office tomorrow morning at 10. You can find me there with your answer." After he left, Emma sat alone with the folded map and the lengthening shadows. The schoolhouse felt different now, not just a place of learning, but a sanctuary about to be breached. She thought about her father's last letter, full of promises about silver strikes and easy money. She thought about 3 months of silence. Most of all, she thought about the choice that lay before her like a river too wide to ford. Outside, the evening star appeared above the eastern horizon. Emma tucked the map into her pinafore and walked home through the gathering dusk, carrying the weight of her decision like stones in her pocket. The rooster at Johansson's mill crowed 5 times, cutting through the September dawn like a rusty blade. Emma lay in her narrow bed, staring at the cabin's rough-hewn ceiling while grey light crept through the single window. The map rested on the nightstand beside her, folded small and worn soft from handling. She'd spent the night making calculations. $55 meant 55 days of full wages for a grown man, or 11 months of school teaching for someone like Miss Caroline. It meant more money than Emma had seen in one place since her father filed the homestead claim. But mathematics couldn't solve everything. Emma dressed quickly and slipped outside before the sun cleared the horizon. The cabin her father had built stood solid on its foundation of prairie stone, but everything else felt fragile as spun glass. The well pump squeaked in the morning breeze. The chicken coop door hung open where she'd forgotten to latch it the night before, small failures multiplying into larger ones. At the schoolhouse, Miss Caroline was already sweeping the front steps. "You're early, Emma." Couldn't sleep. Emma climbed the steps and took the broom from the teacher's hands. "Miss Caroline, what do you know about mining claims?" "Enough to know they're risky business." Miss Caroline pulled her shawl tighter against the morning chill. "Why do you ask?" "My father wrote about silver strikes in Colorado. Said he'd found investors for a claim near Leadville." Emma worked the broom in steady strokes, raising dust that caught the early light. "Said he'd be back with enough money to buy clear title to our land." "And you believed him?" The question hung between them like smoke from a distant fire. Emma had believed because she needed to believe, because hope was easier to carry than doubt. "I wanted to," she said finally. By 8 o'clock, children began arriving for the school day. Timothy Kowalski ran ahead of his older sister, his lunch pail clattering against his leg. The Mueller twins walked hand in hand, their identical faces serious as undertakers. Sarah Brennan carried a slate with yesterday's arithmetic still chalked on its surface. Normal rhythms, normal faces. But underneath it all, Emma felt the weight of time pressing down like storm clouds on the horizon. At 9:30, a rider appeared on the eastern road, raising dust in his wake. Emma pressed her face to the window, hoping against hope to see her father's familiar figure bent over a horse's neck. Instead, she recognized Jake Morrison, who carried mail and messages between the settlements for 2 bits a letter. Morrison tied his horse to the schoolhouse post and climbed the steps with deliberate slowness. His face wore the expression of a man delivering bad news. "Miss Caroline? Got a message for young Emma Hartwell?" The teacher took the folded paper and examined the return address. Her face went still as pond water. "Emma, would you step outside with me?" They stood on the schoolhouse porch while Morrison waited beside his horse, hat in hand. Miss Caroline unfolded the message and read it twice before speaking. "It's from the territorial marshal in Denver," she said quietly. "Your father." The words came in pieces, like a puzzle missing half its parts. "Mining accident. Cave-in at the Molly Pitcher claim. 3 men dead, including one James Hartwell of Dakota Territory. Personal effects being held at the marshal's office pending next of kin." Emma felt the map pressing against her ribs through her pinafore, but it offered no comfort now. The paper that had promised so much seemed suddenly fragile as moth wings. "I'm sorry, child." Morrison's voice was rough with sympathy. "Marshall says there's $17 and some personal items. I can carry word back if you want to claim them." $17. Not enough to pay Mackenzie's debt, much less the land taxes. Not enough to change anything that mattered. "Thank you, Mr. Morrison." Emma's voice sounded strange in her own ears, like an echo from the bottom of a well. I'll send word later." After Morrison rode away, Emma and Miss Caroline stood in the morning sunlight, while normal life continued around them. Children played in the schoolyard. Mrs. Johansen hung more laundry behind the mill. The stage would arrive at 11:15, carrying mail and passengers who still had hope. "What will you do?" Miss Caroline asked. Emma pulled the map from her pocket and unfolded it one more time. Her father's careful surveyor marks seemed to waver in the light, like ink running in the rain. "I don't know," she said, "but I've got until 10 o'clock tomorrow to figure it out." The school bell rang once, marking the half-hour. Time narrowed like a river before the falls, and Emma stood on the bank with no way across. The territorial courthouse clock struck 9 times through the morning air, each chime falling like hammer blows on an anvil. Emma stood outside Brennan's land office, with the map folded in her hand, and $17 in silver coins weighing down her pocket. The money had arrived on yesterday's stage, her father's final gift and final failure combined into one small leather pouch. Cyrus Mackenzie waited inside the office, visible through the window as he bent over papers spread across Brennan's desk. His black gelding stood tied at the hitching post, patient as justice delayed. Other townspeople had gathered along Main Street. Mrs. Johansen with her market basket, Timothy Kowalski's mother with her youngest child balanced on her hip, old Henrik Mueller reading a newspaper on the hotel porch. Word traveled fast in a town of 200 souls. "You don't have to do this alone." Miss Caroline's voice carried the particular gentleness of someone delivering comfort. They didn't quite believe in themselves. She stood beside Emma on the boardwalk, her school dress pressed, and her hair pinned severe as Sunday service. "Yes, I do." Emma smoothed the map's creases with her thumb. "It's my father's debt, my land, my choice." The courthouse clock finished its 9 chimes and fell silent. 60 minutes remained before Mackenzie's deadline, but Emma knew that time moved differently when everything you'd ever loved hung in the balance. Minutes stretched like prairie grass in the wind, long and fragile and easily broken. Through the land office window she watched Mackenzie pull out his pocket watch and frown at its face. Brennan shuffled papers and adjusted his spectacles. 2 men conducting business as if homes and hopes were nothing more than items in a store catalogue. Emma. The voice belonged to Mrs. Brennan, who approached from the direction of the post office with a telegram clutched in her plump fingers. "This just came on the morning wire." The yellow paper crackled as Emma unfolded it. 10 words in block letters that changed everything. Colorado. Mining strike. Confirmed. Stop. Hartwell claim. Sold stop. Funds. Transferred stop. "I don't understand." Emma stared at the telegram, reading it twice more to be certain. "Your father's claim." "Mrs." Brennan's voice carried excitement like a bell ringing Sunday service. "Seems he sold his interest to a mining company before the accident. Enough to pay all debts and more." Emma's hands trembled as she refolded the telegram. "How much more?" "Near $300, according to the bank draft that came with it." $300. Enough to pay Mackenzie, buy clear title to the land, and have money left for seed and winter provisions. Enough to transform the map in her hands from a burden into a promise. The land office door opened, and Mackenzie emerged onto the boardwalk. His face wore the satisfied expression of a man about to foreclose on a child's dreams. "Miss Hartwell, I believe we had an appointment?" Emma stepped forward, feeling the eyes of half the town watching from doorways and windows. The folded map felt warm in her left hand, solid and real as the ground beneath her feet. The bank draft rustled in her right hand, promising security and survival. "We did, Mr. Mackenzie." Emma's voice carried clearly across the morning air. I've come to settle my father's debt." Mackenzie's smile faltered slightly. "With what money, child?" Emma handed him the bank draft, watching his face change as he read the amount. $300 in territorial script, drawn on the First Bank of Denver and signed by the Molly Pitcher Mining Consortium. Where did this come from? His voice carried suspicion, thick as molasses. "My father's mining claim. Seems it was worth something after all." Mackenzie studied the bank draft, holding it up to the light as if searching for forgery. But the paper was genuine, the signatures authentic, the seal pressed deep into expensive bond paper. "This settles the store debt," he said finally. "But there's still the matter of land taxes. $12. Emma pulled the silver coins from her pocket and counted them into his palm. "That covers everything, with interest." The crowd along Main Street had grown larger, drawn by the spectacle of a 14-year-old girl facing down the town's most successful merchant. Emma felt their attention like heat from a blacksmith's forge, but she kept her eyes fixed on Mackenzie's face. He pocketed the money in the bank draft, then pulled out his store ledger and made several entries with a steel nib. "James Hartwell's account is settled in full," he announced, his voice carrying the dull scrape of defeat in his voice. Emma unfolded the map one final time, spreading it flat on the hitching post where everyone could see. Her father's surveyor marks stood clear and true in the morning light boundaries that defined not just property but belonging itself. "Then this land is mine," she said, tracing the creek line with her finger, "all 160 acres, free and clear." The courthouse clock chimed once for the half-hour. Time resumed its normal flow, carrying away the moment of crisis like autumn leaves on the wind. Emma folded the map and tucked it into her pinafore, feeling its familiar weight settle against her ribs. Miss Caroline placed a hand on Emma's shoulder. "What will you do now?" Emma looked down Main Street toward the schoolhouse, where the brass bell hung silent in the morning air. Then she looked toward the horizon, where her father's homestead waited for her return. "I'll finish the school year," she said, "learn everything I can about running a farm, and come spring I'll plant the best wheat crop this territory has ever seen." The crowd began to disperse, returning to their ordinary concerns and daily routines. Mackenzie climbed onto his black gelding and rode away without another word. Mrs. Brennan gathered her skirts and hurried toward the post office, eager to spread news of Emma's good fortune. But Emma remained on the boardwalk, watching the sun climb towards its midday position. The map pressed against her side like a talisman, promising that some things, land, loyalty, the love between father and daughter, could survive even the longest separation. In her pocket, the remaining silver coins clinked softly as she walked toward home. 3 weeks later, Emma sat at her school desk during the afternoon recess, copying her father's surveyor marks onto a clean sheet of paper. Miss Caroline had suggested she make a proper survey map for the Territorial Land Office, something official and permanent to replace the worn original that had carried her through the crisis. Through the schoolhouse window she could see the children playing in the dusty yard. Timothy Kowalski chased the barn cat between the privy and the well. Sarah Mueller practiced her letters with a stick in the dirt. Normal activities, normal rhythms, but everything felt different now that the weight of uncertainty had lifted. The original map lay beside her on the desk, creased and softened by months of handling. It no longer looked like just a legal document. It looked like what it had always been, a father's gift to his daughter, a promise kept across the miles that separated them. "That's fine work, Emma." Miss Caroline stood beside the desk, admiring the careful lines Emma had drawn. "Your father would be proud." Emma set down her pen and flexed her fingers. "I hope so. I'm still learning." "We all are." Miss Caroline glanced toward the window, where the afternoon light slanted golden across the prairie grass. "The land agent stopped by yesterday. Says there's been inquiries about the section north of your property. New homesteaders? A family from Ohio. German name. Something like Zimmerman. They've got 3 children who'll need schooling." Emma nodded, thinking of her own future and the choices that lay ahead. The land was secure now, the debts paid, the boundaries clear. But ownership brought responsibilities she was only beginning to understand. The school bell rang twice, calling the children back to their afternoon lessons. Emma carefully folded the new survey map and placed it in her desk drawer, then picked up the original, her father's map, worn soft as prayer book pages. For a moment she held it against the window, watching sunlight filter through the paper and illuminate every mark and notation. Then she folded it once more and tucked it into her pinafore, where it settled against her ribs like a familiar benediction. The children filed back into the classroom, their faces flushed from play and their voices bright with afternoon energy. Emma took her place among them, no longer just a student, but not quite a teacher either. Something in between, someone who had learned that maps could lead you home even when home seemed lost forever. Outside, the Dakota prairie stretched toward every horizon, vast and patient as the promises that bound one generation to the next. And somewhere in that endless grassland, a 14-year-old girl's 160 acres waited for spring planting and the hope that grew from seeds planted in faith. The paper in her pocket rustled softly as she opened her arithmetic book, a quiet reminder that some deeds were written not in ink, but in the determination to hold fast to what mattered most. If something in this story touched you, linger with us. We'll handle the rest.